εκ μέρους του Κέντρου Έρευνας για τις ανθρωπιστικές επιστήμες. Σήμερα έχουμε έναν ερευνητή για κάτι για το οποίο γνωρίζουμε όχι ως ΚΕΑΕ, αλλά γενικά πολύ λίγα πράγματα. Είναι ένας ερευνητής πάνω σε θέματα της Οθωμανικής Αυτοκρατορίας. Το διδακτορικό του το έκανε στο Μαγγίλ. Το τίτλος είναι Local Patriots in Ecumenical Ottomans, The Orthodox Patriarchate of Constantinople and the Ottoman Configuration of Power, 1768 μέχρι 1828. Είναι τώρα senior research, είναι μέλος της Αμερικάνικης Σχολής Κλασικών Σπουδών εδώ στην Αθήνα, μετά από μία περίοδο στη Γαλλία, και νομίζω έχει να παρουσιάσει μία θέση που είναι και ιδιαίτερα πρωτότυπη από τα ελάχιστα που ξέρω για αυτά τα ζητήματα. Η Ελένη Γκαρά είναι καθηγήτρια του Πανεπιστημίου του Αιγαίου, ιστορία. Νομίζω είναι από τα 10 άτομα που ξέρουν άψογα Οθωμανικά και τη γραφή και τη γλώσσα στην Ελλάδα. Οπότε την ευχαριστούμε πολύ καταρχήν. Οπότε, Yusuf, μπορείς να αρχίσεις, you can start.
Ευχαριστώ.
We'll take it from there.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. Sorry, I might be a bit tired. So let me start by opening all of my cards. This is an attempt to turn my PhD into a book, and I'm trying to test, if you will, how would it work, whether it would work if we talked about the counter-revolution in late 18th or the 19th century, specifically focusing on the Orthodox Patriarchate of Constantinople. So I start with a very basic question, of course. How would you describe a revolution for an Ottoman Sultan, and what would an Ottoman revolution even be? I ask this question because I have an answer that was given at the time, which I will return to. And I wanted to start with this question because I want to make a big claim about the existence of an Ottoman counter-revolution roughly between 1770 and 1830, which saw the development of a new modus operandi between the Patriarchate of Constantinople and the Sublime Porte. There are, of course, many ways to talk about an age of revolution. The traditional story put forward by Palmer and followed from a different point of view by Hobsbawm emphasized the importance of the Enlightenment in leading to revolutionary movements that were sustained steps towards more democratic societies. More recently, perspectives have emerged to displace the Atlantic as the center of a revolutionary world, and to move beyond the Enlightenment as a prelude. We have, for example, Waves Across the South by Sujit Sivasundaram, which argues for a global moment of revolutions in which indigenous populations organized to push back the empire, meaning both French and the English-British Empire, in the chaos of the French Revolution, only to be subdued by the counter-revolution brought by the waves of British expansion. We have spatial studies that focus on how revolutions reconfigured spatial configurations between different centers of power and commerce. We have a perspective that focuses on radical social change, defining revolution in terms of changes in morality, behavior, and emotions. Political interpretations are not dead, of course. There's a resurgent interest in the conceptual and intellectual worlds of the revolutionaries. Maurizio Isabella's Southern Europe in the Age of Revolutions is a relevant example of this, reading the liberal constitutionalism as the foundation of the age itself. A little older and more relevant to my discussion is Jeremy Adelman's concept of imperial revolution, which sees the growing inter-imperial rivalry of the late 18th century as forcing imperial centers to incorporate their territories and make more concessions to these territories, only to end up disappointing them and forcing these territories and local power holders to look for alternatives. Many of these perspectives have found echoes in Ottoman studies, in particular the rise of local Muslim magnates such as Ali Pasha of Yanina and the turmoil surrounding the deposition of Selim III in 1807 are usually placed in the context of the Age of Revolutions. The Greek Revolution finds its place in a revolutionary framework, but although we emphasize the Ottoman context more and more, it tends to be there only to remind us that these events took place actually in the Ottoman Empire. To drive the point home, let me ask you, would you be willing to call it an Ottoman revolution? It is even worse for what happened in Ottoman Serbia in 1804, because the tendency is to call it a revolt rather than a revolution. We are reminded that the Serbs wanted to return to an Ottoman statu quo, and therefore they were not really revolutionaries. This reluctance has in its roots developments in the 1970s and 80s, when nationalist assumptions were questioned and historians wanted to prove that these revolutions were not nationalist, therefore they were not revolutions. This reluctance persists in certain circles to this day, but we have also largely moved beyond the simple equation of revolution equals nation state. I will talk today with a very simple assumption. The Orthodox populations of Ottoman Europe were an essential element of Ottoman society. The revolutions they attempted, and sometimes succeeded in, transformed the empire itself. This transformation was achieved through the interplay of revolutionary movements that emerged among Ottoman Orthodox populations and counter-revolutionary measures that brought together the Sublime Porte and the Orthodox Patriarchate of Constantinople. The increased inter-imperial rivalry of the Age of Revolutions, the spread of revolutionary ideas among the Ottoman Orthodox, the rise of local power holders, all contributed to the development of the alliance between the Patriarchate and the Sublime Porte, shaping an Ottoman counter-revolution. So it is time to return to the question that opened this talk. How would you describe a revolution to an Ottoman Sultan? In March 1793, almost 40 days after the execution of Louis XVI, an anonymous person claiming to be not French submitted a report on the French Revolution to the Sublime Porte. The report is full of spelling mistakes, perhaps indicating that the author was not part of the imperial bureaucratic elite. Whether he was a foreigner or even French, despite his claims to the contrary, is debatable. The report explains in detail why a revolution was necessary in France. The nobility exploited the people, they were behind every war in Europe, and they and the kings made life impossible for the common people. The author tries to make Selim III's government sympathetic to the revolution after the execution of Louis XVI, although the Sultan was already quite sympathetic, and makes a comparison with the Ottoman context, and I quote, "The king in particular had so many transgressions against the French and their laws that it was almost as if, God forbid, an Ottoman Sultan had denied his prophet." End of quote. On the face of it, this comparison seems ridiculous and reinforces the idea that the Ottomans are alien to a European context and that only references to Islam make sense to them. Their language is not well suited to understanding the conceptual world of European elites, as one historian claimed. However, a long-term approach to the 18th century might show just the opposite. Baki Tezcan has demonstrated the importance of Islam as the legal basis of the Ottoman world and the comparative understanding of Sharia as the basis of legality, even constitutionalism, in the Ottoman context. In both cases, according to our petitioner, the claim is that if a monarch works against the basis of legality, revolution is permissible, even necessary. But in the Ottoman Empire, the position was actually quite common. 1/3 of the Ottoman sultans were deposed, many were also executed. Should we call all these revolutions? None of these ex-sultans actually denied the prophet, I must say, at least as far as we know. So perhaps we should see revolution as the rejection of the most basic assumption of power in a society. In France, according to our anonymous report, it was the rejection of the rule of the nobility and later of the monarchy. In the Ottoman Empire, according to our petitioner again, it seems to have something to do with Islam. At this point, to highlight an Ottoman perspective, I would like to bring to your attention a short formula by Sultan Mahmud II. During the Greek Revolution of 1821, Sultan Mahmud II made an interesting comment about his position in Ottoman society and the legitimacy of his position. The comment is written on an undated report, which, according to internal evidence, should be dated to 1821, about the removal of a certain dervish named Haydar Baba from the Janissary quarters because he was suspected of being an Iranian spy. The Greek Revolution was underway and the war with Iran had just begun. The Ottoman state needed the Janissaries on its side and had no tolerance for a suspected spy among the courts. After a long description of the discussion with the Janissaries, the report tells of a bizarre request from them. The Janissaries argue that there are too many Armenians and too many Rum in the capital, and they do not feel safe from them in case of war with an external enemy. They ask for the removal of these non-Muslims, or their massacre by the state, or at least for permission to massacre them themselves. Mahmud II explains in his note, "It's obvious that no one from the Rum milleti can be trusted, but I cannot order them to kill this many subjects without knowing the Islamic ruling on the issue, as our sublime state is a Mohammedan state, and the submission of the people to my imperial self is because I am the leader of the Muslims." One is reminded at this point of Shahnizade's description of Mahmud actually trying to get a fatwa to kill every Greek in the city, Orthodox in the city, and his failure to do so. The Sultan's note gives us a window to the Sultan's perception of his and his subjects' positions vis-à-vis each other. The Ottoman state is Mohammedan, meaning that it's an Islamic state, but the Sultan is the leader of the Muslims. He makes it clear that people, Halk, submit to him because he is the leader of the Muslims. There's an inkling of the idea of representation here. Mahmud is the leader of the Muslims and hence he must respect Islamic law. He does not ask what happens if not, but it is implicitly clear the Muslim population could find another, as they had actually just done so with his uncle, Selim III, and with his brother, Mustafa IV, both of whom were dethroned by Istanbul's populations. Moreover, he seems to define his population as Muslims, differentiating between Halk and Reaya. A revolution in the Ottoman sense depends on an understanding of the place of Islam in the Ottoman society then. Mahmud II probably never read the anonymous report on the French Revolution from 3 decades ago, but the understanding is common. The Sultan's legitimacy depended on the implementation of Islamic rulings, an Ottoman version of the rule of law, if you will. However, sultans had been deposed and killed all throughout Ottoman history, unlike comparable European cases. Perhaps the specialty of an Ottoman revolution is to be found in what is missing in Mahmud II's formula. The submission of a huge portion of the Sultan's subjects was not because he was the leader of the Muslims, as they were not even Muslims. It was because they accepted, or had to accept, the primacy of Islam. One type of revolution in the Ottoman context was challenging the entire system through challenging its most basic element, the primacy of Islam and Muslims. In such a case, not only the Sultan, but also the Janissaries and the Muslim elite running the empire would be at the receiving end of a revolutionary rage. Perhaps the perfect revolution against the Ottoman state could only be carried out by those who rejected the primacy of Islam and Muslims. By non-Muslims, or at least by those who rejected the Ottoman version of Islam, by Wahhabis. And such revolutions were carried out in Serbia, Greece, but also in the Arabian Peninsula. They had the potential to challenge the entire system. This challenge developed over time, just like the Ottoman response to it. The challenge probably began with the Ottoman-Russian War of 1768-74, when the Ottoman elite was thrown into a cutthroat rivalry and was further complicated by the French Revolution and indigenous revolutionary movements. The Ottoman counter-revolution leaned on the Patriarchate of Constantinople. I will try now to give a chronological story in the rest of my talk, going through the Ottoman-Russian War, the French, Serbian, and Greek revolutions. The first link in the long chain of reforms and revolutions, projects and delusions, rebellions and repressions that led in the 18th century to the collapse of the old regime, argued Franco Venturi, are to be sought on the margins of the continent, in unexpected and peripheral places, on the islands and peninsulas of the Mediterranean, among lords and peasants in Poland and Bohemia, and in Denmark and Sweden to the north. Venturi's detailed work on the Italian reactions to various constitutional crises and revolts around Europe starts with the Russian involvement in the Mediterranean. He underlines how new hopes arose among rebels in various places throughout the 1760s and 70s, although the first crisis did not lead to permanent new institutions. It is interesting to speculate about what the Ottoman Muslim elite would think about Venturi's take. Süleyman Penah Efendi, an Ottoman statesman of Morea origin, would probably agree, I would say, as his account of the Orlov revolt begins with a condensed story of the rise of Russia. I quote, "Who wanted to seize lands in the Mediterranean and the New World, like the stately kings of England, France, Spain, and the Netherlands," end of quote. The Ottomans were faced with a number of rebellions during the war, many of which were led by Ottoman Christians. Moldavian and Wallachian boyars were quick to choose the emperors over the Sultan. Montenegro had always been a territory with dubious loyalties. The real shock to the Ottoman elite came, however, when Alexei Orlov entered the Eastern Mediterranean in 1770, burned down the Ottoman navy, started the so-called Orlov revolt in the Morea, and controlled the Aegean for the rest of the war. Catherine II was simultaneously disseminating propaganda that combined an Enlightenment rhetoric with a concern for the protection of Ottoman Christians. These proclamations were found and translated by the Ottoman government as well. To quote just one, Catherine counsels, I quote, "each and every able Christian to benefit from the conditions of the current struggle towards the lifting of the yoke and the achievement of independence, to take up arms everywhere against the common enemy of Christianity, and to bring violence against it for the realization of the common good." End of quote. Such declarations notwithstanding, the belligerents chose primarily to negotiate with local lay elites rather than the clergymen. We have accounts of the Patriarchate refuting an ex-patriarch who joined the Russians in the Aegean and asking Ukrainian Cossacks not to fight against the Ottomans. But when it came to surveillance, collection of weapons, or negotiation for a return to subjectitude in the Morea and beyond, Orthodox clergymen are initially totally absent. In fact, the Orlov revolt emphasized a fault line in Ottoman structure. Local clergymen were local men, and they had very strong connections to local landowners. When the latter rebelled, the former followed them. The Ottoman solution to this in 1772, when the Orlov revolt was quelled, was to have metropolitans from outside appointed to seize in the Morea. These new metropolitans had closer ties to the Ottoman center, and they were exempted from many of the fees associated with their appointments. They were expected to help the Ottoman government in the new status quo. An early example of the new policies concerned the fate of the Kojavashes. A lot of the Kojavashes had escaped with the Russians. Metropolitan bishops and bishops could be replaced, as they were ultimately agents of Istanbul, but it was not easy to replace Kojavashes, or at least the appointment could not be made from a pool of candidates in the capital. Moreover, the absence of Kojavashes underlined the necessity for the Ottoman government to fill the void. So, in 1773, the Ottomans made lists of those who had escaped and confiscated their property. To carry out this process, they made use of the metropolitan bishops who had been appointed 2 years prior. One document describes the process in the following way, I quote, the despots and metropolitan bishops of the province of the Morea were brought to Nafplio and asked about the escapees and bandits of their region. They argued that if the past crimes of those who have escaped and those who are in the way of banditry were pardoned, they would accept submission and return to their ancient places. End of quote. The metropolitan bishops managed to convince the local Ottoman officials such that orders written in Greek and Turkish were sent out with the bishops themselves. The functioning of the Sublime Porte Patriarchate axis reveals that the local imperial divide of the Age of Revolutions existed for the Patriarchate as well. After the experience of 1770, the Patriarchate of Constantinople became more and more incorporated into the Ottoman structure of loyalty production. One can see the rising expectations of the Ottoman government in the notes of Sultan Selim III. During the next war, this time against the Russian-Austrian alliance that was fought between 1787-92, the Ottomans were a lot more careful about the possibility of a surprise front in the Aegean. To ensure the loyalty of his Orthodox subjects, the Sultan turned to the Patriarch, and he was not willing to listen to excuses. I quote from a note of his: "I don't care. In this, I only care about the Patriarch and the serving metropolitan bishops. If there is a drop of treason and help to the Muscovites, I will kill all of them. They should consider this and bind the issue to a strong arrangement according to their right. There is no way I will accept excuses or pretexts. End of quote. The stakes were quite high for the Orthodox clergymen, but did they have anything to gain from this arrangement? Let's briefly mention that the Orthodox clergymen were privileged subjects of the Sultan. They were exempt from the head tax, they were allowed to carry weapons, and they could always ask for armed men from local governors to protect them in their spiritual and material duties. The jurisdiction of the Patriarchate largely coincided with Ottoman borders too. The Patriarchate lost metropolitancies and population and revenues attached to them when the empire lost territory. The fact that another Orthodox power took over such territories did not change much for the institution, although it gave many of the clergy and the faithful options that they decided to follow. So the French Revolution added a new level to the worries of the Ottoman elite. Enlightened revolutionary movements that threatened the primacy of both the Sublime Porte and the Orthodox Church. Ottoman Greeks, clergymen included, had long participated in European Enlightenment. However, although individual clergymen could participate in Enlightenment writing and translation, it seems that the Patriarchate as an institution was not willing to ignore what it considered harmful philosophy, even when the Ottoman government did not care. Banning of philosophical works, removal of teachers, and even excommunication happened even when the Sublime Porte had no idea what was going on. I'm sorry. Okay. The interests of the Muslim and patriarchal elite aligned only with the French Revolution and revolutionary activities of Ottoman Orthodox. An alliance was formed, and the Patriarchate was the experienced party in this collaboration. The publication of the anti-enlightenment pamphlet called Discussants is an example of this. In an environment where Ottoman Orthodox intellectuals and local elites were contacting Napoleon Bonaparte to search for an alliance, the imperial elite felt moved to contract. European diplomacy was full of rumors of a possible invasion in Ottoman Europe at this point, and both intellectuals like Rigas Velestinis and local elites like the rulers of the Mali Peninsula had sought audiences with the French general. The Ottoman government knew of most of these contacts. One of the responses was a pamphlet written by the Patriarch of Jerusalem, published by an Armenian printer, who later set up both the Patriarchates and the Ottoman engineering schools presses, and disseminated by the Sublime Porte. As could be expected, the pamphlet exhorts Ottoman Orthodox to be loyal to the Sultan as a godly duty and not to be misled by this non-existent, fake, so-called liberty. It's interesting that a note by the Grand Vizier Izzet Mehmet Pasha about the Patriarchate Didaskalia is to be found on a report about the arrest of Rigas Velestinis. It says, I quote, "As it is his imperial knowledge, the papers by the Patriarch of Jerusalem that are to be spread to certain places are being published and completed and are about to be sent out." End of quote. On the Morea front, the involvement of the Patriarchate is very clear. We know that the Patriarch, the later ethnomarch Grigorios V, sent 3 exarchs to the Morea in 1797 to warn Kocabashis and clergymen alike. Germanos of Paleopatre was sent to warn Moreots about a possible French incursion. A patriarchal letter dated May 1797 to the Metropolitan of Christianoupoli, an address to all the metropolitan bishops in the Morea, warns against getting involved in earthly affairs. They are banned from making common cause with the Kocabashis and with the Vekils in Constantinople for whatever reason. Moreover, they are asked to pay special attention to lay leaders and inform the authorities if they show any sign of deviation. Another document dated July 1797, summarized by Eleni, is a patriarchal letter to the metropolitan bishops of Amikle, Lakedamonia, Palepatre, Monemvasia, and Eleni, informing them about the appointment of Arapios as exarchos and warning the metropolitan bishops not to get entangled and not to allow the lay leaders to get entangled in the, I quote, defilements that currently appeared, end of quote. In the Marni, local leaders received a letter from Napoleon himself, which was answered with the involvement of the Ottoman government. Whether the Patriarchate got involved is dubious, but the response letter that was prepared in Greek and Turkish versions invoked much repeated Christian formulas about the legitimacy of the Ottoman Empire. I quote, "Thanks to our Padishah, we have liberty and welfare. It's our duty as subjects and the decree of our religion to submit and be loyal to him." End of quote. Napoleon's men were telling them that they would save them from tyrants and that they have endured this coercion and tyranny for so long, and if they follow our code, it will be removed from them. The final answer given to Napoleon was that, and I quote, "Nothing can happen in the world without the will of God Almighty, creator of the universes. Whatever he wills, humans should be content with it. As the sublime Ottoman state was chosen by the compassionate, we are subject and subservient to it." End of quote. In short, the French Revolution not only raised hopes among some Christians of Ottoman Europe, but also pushed the Sublime Porte and the Patriarchate of Constantinople into a closer alliance, creating a new phase in the Ottoman counter-revolution. However, the Morea was not the Sublime Porte's only concern in 1787, so we shall turn to another Ottoman territory, Serbia. In 1797, Ottoman Serbia was living through the results of three very significant developments. First, the Sultan confiscated the chiefliks belonging to the Janissaries and essentially pushed them away from the province. Second, Serbia was threatened by the rise of Kazvantol Osman of Vidin, who supported the said Janissaries. Third, it was now essentially a neighbor to the French Republic. The Sublime Porte, already in 1793, started a reform movement in Ottoman Serbia. The Patriarchate was involved in almost every step. The new guardian of Belgrade, Hacı Mustafa Pasha, was appointed to replace one of Kazvantolu's friends, Shashik Pasha. Serbian sources tell of a petition by the Serbian Kneževi, organized by Mustafa Pasha's friend, Alexander Nadović. In 4 years, it became clear that the new governor needed the military support of the Serbian Kneževi themselves. In April 1797, basically all the knez of the districts of the governorate of Belgrade signed a petition to the Sublime Porte. It was originally written in Greek and translated to Ottoman Turkish. The Kneževi start by explaining that their revolt during the last war was not because of the mischief in their nature, but due to the Janissaries in Belgrade who treated them like captives rather than re'aya, and who were joined by the appointed governors in oppressing them. However, since the appointment of Mustafa Pasha, they had been very content, and I quote, "In thanks for this great benefaction, we become guarantors for each other, and we all guarantee to sacrifice our heads and lives in the service of the Sultan." End of quote. What they are promising is to provide men for the Pasha and the Sultan whenever and wherever necessary. We are guaranteeing an undertaking, whenever necessary, to provide 300 riflemen from each of the 12 districts that we inhabit, to each of which 100 Sekban soldiers will be added by the aforementioned vizier, in order to defend our borders from the mischief of rebels, and to prove our presence and service, and serve with loyalty and zeal, in the way of the Sultan of abundant sanctity, wherever we are ordered to go, if it becomes necessary for us to join battles and wars in other places. This petition was first received by the Patriarchate, who translated it and forwarded it to the Sublime Porte. The plan for a Serbian militia was approved, and it seems that it was blessed by the Patriarchate, who sent Philotimos, the Metropolitan Bishop of Samokov, to Serbia in November 1797 to preach loyalty to the Ottoman government. The creation of a Serbian militia did not help Mustafa Pasha when the Ottoman effort to subdue Pazmantolu by besieging Vidin failed. In 1802, the Janissaries were back in Belgrade and they murdered Mustafa Pasha. In 1804, Mustafa Pasha's son, Hasan Bey, allied with the remainder of the Serbian militia, conspired a revolt that was discovered by the Janissaries. This was the moment when the Kneževi revolted, demanding a return to status quo under Mustafa Pasha. This is where the argument for what happened in 1804 not being a revolution comes from. Since the Serbs wanted to go back to something, as the argument goes, it's not worthy of the name of revolution. However, what the Serbian Kneževi wanted was already something radically different than what was valid for most of the Christians of Ottoman Europe. They also made it clear repeatedly that they did not want the return of Muslim superiority in any shape. The continued insistence on Austrian guarantee was one of the forms this insistence took, a condition that the Ottomans just could not accept because it was against Ottoman sovereignty. It was a way of trying to create a new situation in Serbia. An Austrian source says that when the Kneževi approached Ebu Bekir Pasha of Bosnia, who had been appointed to handle the situation at the end of July 1804, probably just before he entered Belgrade, to ask for an Austrian guarantee, I quote, "The vizier's eyes filled with blood and he thundered, 'Olmaz, impossible, Olmaz,' and then even louder, 'Olmaz. In our Sultan's land, no one dares to interfere. Our Sultan has enough true Turks to tell him who is guilty," end of quote. Serbian attitudes are also clear in their interactions with Ottoman officials before the Ottoman-Russian War started in 1806 and changed the equilibrium yet again. In 1804, when Ebu Bekir Pasha was in front of the castle of Belgrade, surrounded by the Serbian encampment, besieging the Janissaries holed up in the castle, the Kneževi in the Serbian camps came to him to offer an alliance in the taking of the castle by force. Just how shocked the Pasha was can be glanced from his report. "Your petition is a corruption of the exalted order and Ferman. Never speak of it again. There is no case of Reaya marching on a castle any time since the creation of the world," end of quote. Already at this time, the Serbs were not ready to go back to full submission to Muslim superiority in their province. This, to me, is revolution. The Ottoman reaction to this revolution involved the Patriarchate from the start. When the news of the turmoil reached Istanbul, one of the first measures that was thought about was making the Patriarch explain to the rebels the position of the capital in support of them. At the same time, the two metropolitan bishops in Ottoman Serbia chose to remain and support the Serbs in different capacities. One of them later became a strong supporter of Russian interests. However, the Ottoman government employed neighboring metropolitan bishops as negotiators and spies, and frequently sent them into Serbia throughout the revolution when relations soured after 1807. Apart from these functions, one Daniil gained the metropolitan see of Užice, and I quote from a document talking about him. "The metropolitan named Daniil from Istanbul was given the metropolitan see of Užice as an award for his previous service and his demonstration of loyalty because he served the soldiers of Islam financially and physically and helped in the conquest and seizure of Belgrade," end of quote. In short, reform, revolution, and counter-revolution interacted in Ottoman Serbia to create risks and opportunities for everyone involved. I told you that it is easier to call the Greek Revolution a revolution, but it is harder to say it's an Ottoman revolution, especially compared to the Serbian Revolution of 1804. I'd like to emphasize that nothing I will say is to diminish the importance of the Greek Enlightenment, the Filikieteria, or other localities that were essential to the revolution, but I will talk about the Morea. I don't think the revolution would have succeeded or even begun without the Kojabashis, Kleftes, and the clergymen of the Morea. By 1821, there was already a well-developed Moreot identity. The Kojabashis were drawing up deeds of alliance promising to be loyal to their common patriva, the Morea. Sometimes Muslims were among the signatories of these too. In the Ottoman capital, they were called Moralı, be they Muslim or Christian. They had the right to choose representatives to be sent to the capital. In 1820, the revolutionaries among them were already organized as a local branch of the Filiketeia, arguing that they had the right to control the local finances of the organization. It should not be surprising that one of the first declarations of the revolution sent to the foreign consuls in Patras talks about the Moreans revolting and not about the Hellenes revolting. The revolution created the field where different localities, but also outside intellectual developments, were discussed that ultimately created the Hellenic nation. Morean clergymen participated in the revolt. Some of them, like Grigorios of Methoni, led men into battle and besieged fortifications. Grigorios argued that, I quote, "God does not approve that a millet should be under tyranny and oppression while the other is free and in ease. His approval is for all of us to be free and steadfast in the religions we have." End of quote. The bishop declared that the Greeks had been in captivity, but now, I quote, "God has allowed our salvation." He made a similar declaration to the inhabitants of Navarino, where he claimed that, I quote again, "Wallachia, Moldavia, the Serbs, and Istanbul have risen, and we intend to acquire the degree of liberty from now on, as you have been free until now." End of quote. This was the stakes of an Ottoman revolution, if you will allow me to call it that. It was a radical rejection of the superiority of the Muslim element in the Ottoman society. Just like 1770, the clergymen in the Morea were local men and had very strong ties to local elites. Some of them were members of grandee families, others were protégés. It seems that the Sublime Porte and the Patriarchate were not strong enough to impose imperial agents, and the incorporation of the Morea into the imperial structure worked through different social ties that emphasized concessions. Things were quite different in the Ottoman capital, though. In April 1821, after the Sublime Porte decided that the plays of Patriarch Grigorios V were not working, the Sultan ordered the execution of numerous Orthodox clergymen in and out of the capitals. The reason was simple. These clergymen failed their duty of keeping their flock loyal to the Sultan and of reporting seditious activities among the Orthodox to the Ottoman government. Orthodox prelates had to suffer the outcome of a revolutionary period. In this talk, I have been trying to come up with a way to discuss revolution in an Ottoman context, focusing on non-Muslim communities. My main argument was that the rejection of the superiority of Muslims and Islam should be considered one of the main types of an Ottoman revolution. I believe such a conceptualization will allow us to talk more about Ottoman provinces rather than tying everything to Istanbul. It might allow us to talk about not only revolution and counter-revolution, but also about reform from a local perspective. We moved beyond associating reform solely with military developments, perhaps, but our idea of Ottoman reform is still strongly tied to what Istanbul wanted for the empire in its totality. Should we not call the various arrangements in the Morea, Serbia, the Aegean Islands reform as well? Would this not radically alter our story of the Ottoman Empire in the Age of Revolutions? I believe talking about a counter-revolution and about the Patriarchate as an Ottoman institution in this age has this added benefit. Finally, a word of caution, as I repeatedly used Muslim superiority as a concept. It's easy to associate post-Ottoman Southeast European nationalist movements with religious identities. They did in fact fight against Muslim overlords in the name of Christianity. Many of them were uncompromising to the existence of Muslims in their territories too, resulting in various massacres. Still, these revolutions were the results of a process of imperial incorporation that was sometimes haphazard, but was always organized around the alliance between the Sublime Porte and the Patriarchate. Increasing stakes of warfare in Ottoman Europe resulted in an increasing need to incorporate non-Muslim territories with the center, and the Patriarch of Constantinople played the role of the glue. The problem was not that the non-Muslim populations were under unbearable oppression, it was that there was reform, or at least talk of reform now, which created new hopes, many of which were crushed. The idea of reform did not die at the revolutionary age too. Already in the later years of Mahmud II, it was a concern. With Tanzimat, it took an entirely different shape. Organized religion in this sense defined the experience of revolution and counter-revolution, and left its mark on the Ottoman age of revolutions and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yusuf. Eleni.
Okay. Of course. Thank you, Yusuf, for this rich paper that makes us all think. It's very important, and I'm sure we will have much discussion. So let me make a few comments. Yusuf urges us to think about the revolution and the counter-revolution in the Ottoman Empire between 1770 and 1830 from an imperial perspective that puts into the fore the Ottoman central state and the Patriarchate of Constantinople. At the core of his approach is a broad understanding of revolution, inspired by international research on the age of revolutions, and especially Jeremy Edelman's concept of imperial revolution, to which Yusuf has already referred. The age of revolutions in current historiography is an expanded concept for a global era of change, produced by the advent of modernity in different societies and under diverse circumstances. The focus is on the global crisis of sovereignty that started in the 1760s and was caused by the expansion of colonial powers and the conflicts between them. Happily, research both in history and social science has moved away from the rather unfruitful effort to differentiate between revolution and revolt or other forms of contentious crowd action. It has also moved away from this bipolar opposition between national revolution versus pre-national revolt. Although the modernity as a crucial element in the age of revolutions is as a prerequisite. So this is something that is important to keep in mind, that even though this new conceptualization of what goes on not only after the French Revolution but also before is basis, continues to base, but in a different way, on the concept of modernity, whatever that means. Okay, and this is there is. I mean, keep having this in mind. There is no question that the Ottoman Empire witnessed a prolonged crisis of sovereignty in these decades, so between 1770 and 1830, or that it became directly implicated in the rivalries of the colonial powers. And here, so Russia is also emerges in this period as a colonial power, and of course we have France and Britain directly in the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Mediterranean and Middle East. So Yusuf's discussion of the Ottoman case along these lines is more than welcome, I would say. And his analysis about what revolution can mean in an Ottoman context is both original and thought-provoking, and so I think it is very fruitful. And I think I could not agree more with his conclusion, which I would like to repeat. Revolution had to challenge, quote, the entire system through challenging its most basic element, the primacy of Islam and Muslims, which happened in the Serbian and Greek case, or as Yusuf also adds, or the Ottoman version of Islam, which happened with the Wahhabis in the Arabian Peninsula. So, of course, there is still the question of whether all these, let's say, these three cases still qualify, or it is helpful, let's say, to call all of them revolutions, but still, okay, this is something that within the context that you have, the historiographical context that Yusuf adopts and proposes, it makes sense. I'm concerned, however, about the use of the term counter-revolution and its chronology. So, firstly, counter-revolutions presuppose the outbreak of revolutions and the analytical category revolution. So, here perhaps I should make a distinction, a comment. I had the impression throughout this paper that you interchange you alternate, let's say, the use of the term revolution as an analytical category and as an indigenous category, let's say. And these are two different things, of course. Okay. And the analytical category revolution, however broadly defined, still retains in its core the sense of mass uprising against a regime. So it's a popular mass uprising. However, so did such an uprising take place in 1770? We can discuss a lot about it. I don't want to introduce such a discussion. Don't think that it's worth it. I just want to say that I find it doubtful on several grounds. So this would be my first comment on the, let's say, this interpretation of the chronology. That, okay, we have, starting from the 1770s, we have a revolution or a quasi-revolution in 1770, and so we have, from that period on, we have a counter-revolution with the characteristics that you have discussed so nicely, have analyzed so nicely. So, secondly, counter-revolution can be defined as opposition or resistance to revolutionary movements. It can refer to the effort to defeat it beforehand or to restore the old regime after a successful revolution. So, there's no denying that after 1770 the Ottoman government took measures to prevent future unrest in the Morea. But does this equal counter-revolution? And so another comment here, without saying that I cannot really offer you, but I feel that if you are going to make such claims in the book, to rework your thesis in a way that you offer large interpretations, you shall need more theory. So here is something that I don't have anything to propose or to offer. It's just that I get this feeling that if you really want to make a powerful argument, you have to anchor it on a theoretical basis, most probably you have to base it somehow in social science, in new stuff, not the 70s and 80s, of course. So this, the new stuff that is going on, the new phase, let's say, of revolution theory. So to get back, in my view, the Orlofika and its aftermath, I agree with what you have presented. I mean, how there's nothing to say about it. The Ottoman state did take several measures in the aftermath of 1770, and this side that you highlight, the use of the clergymen and the use of the Patriarchate as a mechanism, so it's the church as part of the state and as a mechanism of controlling a territory, controlling populations, and efficacy, disciplining them, and so on. It's hugely important. And of course, we know there is much work on the church and those years, and but I think this is very important what you do and what you can offer in this discussion, that you can show the Ottoman side of it, and the way that it's not this kind of these efforts by the church and this kind of, let's say, disciplining and controlling is not something that comes eternally out of the fear of losing the Greek Orthodox to the revolutionary ideas and to the new, but also part of a, let's say, tacit agreement or an alliance, as you put it, with the state, which is part of what the church is at that time. And I think that you can further make this argument more powerful by, not necessarily this chapter, but I mean more general in your work, by showing how in those decades the church is used, and the Patriarchate and the politics they are used by the central government and the provincial administration. And the difference between what the church is and how it operates, and what its relationship is with the center, or what its role is in the administration before, let's say, the 1780s, 90s, and after, it's immense, at least from the material that I am aware of. So I think this will strengthen your argument. But to come back onto my doubts about your chronology. So my impression is that Orlofika and its aftermath rather confuse than help your argument. And I feel that there is no need to go back to 1770, because all your evidence here in the paper, and also evidence that I know haphazardly, okay, I have not really done research like you in the material, but all the evidence that I'm aware of points to the 1790s. And this is obviously here. And this can be related because it links greatly with all this great, wonderful Greek work that has been going on decades in Syriou and Glapas, and more recently Arvanidakis and so on, about what the changes, the ideological and political, and also changes within the Greek Orthodox, and all this discussion, I mean, in bibliography, about the counter-enlightenment. So the Greek counter-enlightenment, spearheaded by a part of not official church at first, but in those years of the turning of the century, then adopted and supported by the official church. So this is what you do, and what so the Greek bibliography and all these fields says can be combined wonderfully. And I think from if you go at it from in this perspective, then there is room to argue for a counter-revolution, but from the 1790s onwards, not before. And of course, considering if one adopts this presupposes an adoption of the definition of counter-revolution, that is something not after to restore, but preventive, to prevent a revolutionary momentum of gathering power and of revolutions erupting. And so I think that this is something that there is, you can explore with these combinations, but I'm very, very, very doubtful about what happens before. So perhaps you can accommodate this 1770 to 1790s, where all this evidence begins, by in a different way, because it's, of course, it is important. Mm-hmm. So it's the before in very many ways. But I think that if you keep it, as you say that there is a counter-revolution since the 1770s, this will dilute your argument, which I find is important and can be formulated even more powerfully. So I will end with a couple of things. You have these questions. If we talk about the Greek Revolution as an Ottoman Revolution, you know very well that I definitely would. But not only. So the Greek Revolution can be classified in many types of revolutions, and yes, from the perspective of Jeremy Ottoman and so on, yes, I would say that this certainly qualifies as an Ottoman revolution as well. Another question that you put in your paper: did the clergy have anything to gain from this alliance? I think that this is the wrong question, or you must formulate it in a different way, because this does not have to do with personal gains or even the institution as such, if you don't mean clergymen as persons, but clergymen as part of the institution. Even then, it's a wrong question to ask, in my opinion, because the arrangement, let's say, between church and state is καταστατικό, is a constitution. Constitutive, thank you. Is a constitutive part of the Ottoman governance, of the Ottoman Empire. So this does not mean that the relationship changes over time. So yes, I think that you could argue, there is room to argue that in those years, within this framework of counter-revolution, you could talk of an alliance, at least in certain domains, but which we cannot talk of an alliance, for instance, between church and state in the 15th century or the 16th, nothing of the sort. But still, there's no point of going at the matter by questioning whether they have to gain or not. The church is there, it's part of the state, they have a very difficult relationship that changes over the centuries, and at this particular moment, I think you write it at some point, their interests are allied. They different, so from different reasons. So they have this, there is this, their interests going side by side, and then this is ground for an alliance, along with other things that one could say. So
let me make some comments, and perhaps we can. These are comments from an amateur. So I will not comment on Karabiçak's, Yusuf Karabiçak's emphasis on the question of revolution. But there is something else which goes throughout the paper, and this is the notion of enlightenment. And I think one should problematize that notion a bit more. What do I mean by that? I think one of the issues that brings the Sublime Porte to the Patriarchate so close together after 1790 is the anti-clericalist thrust of the French Revolution. Because they are very much worried that if the ideas of the French Revolution are the ones which will dominate the scene, then there will be a lot of trouble on the power structure of the Patriarchate and of course of the Sublime Porte. But at the same time, we have the German version of the Enlightenment. And in the German version, there is the notion of conciliation between church and state, between church and the king. So I think it will be, exactly because we know the period so well, it will be very interesting to understand the appropriation of enlightenment within the Ottoman Empire. Not by the Ottomans, but within the Ottoman Empire. And to bring out the fact that the Patriarchate was not, this virtuous institution which safeguarded the Orthodox population, and there was this power structure, and we know power structures have this love-hate relationship. I think this is an exceedingly original and interesting thing, because it comes in a way as a result of how the Enlightenment is being appropriated by the Ottoman framework. Mm-hmm. In this respect, it will be interesting to see the Armenians. It will be interesting to see what the rabbis are thinking.
In his third book, if I may. We should not terrorize him, I mean.
But we know in Europe at that time, because of the post-French revolutionary situation, we know Napoleon was very anti-clericalist as well. So that part of the French Enlightenment goes through. And at the same time, one has all the other aspects. And I felt that there is a lot that could be said concerning the Patriarchate and this very interesting shifting ways of its relationship with the Ottoman state. Okay, so I felt that this is a really strong point, and if you have any comments on that, fair enough. If you don't, fair enough again. So, Yusuf.
Thank you very much, both of you. I agree with all of the things you said. For the book, I think the thing I want to make, and I am still not decided, is to really have a proper discussion of enlightenment and reform too. So all these things about 1770 and afterwards, I'm thinking about reform. I'm still not decided. I try to say at the end what I think of reform. The Ottomans trying to change how things work in Morea twice in the last 2 decades before the revolution. So to me, in general, that is not something seen as part of reform. People will talk about the irade cedid, nizam-ı cedid things and connect it to there, but I'm not really convinced of that. So I still don't have a good understanding of what I want to do with that.
I agree with your take on reforming those gates. Yeah. Yes, they are exploring various they are experimenting with various kinds of, and so they're experimenting with the islands, they're experimenting with the Morea, they're experimenting with the area, they're experimenting with, if I may add here, they are experimenting because they don't want to change the system. So they're experimenting to keep the regime, the masculine supremacy, alive. That is why, at the same time that there is all this experimentation, then there are also these measures that suddenly they sound so super high conservative and so on. So it's.
Yeah, I agree. For the part about enlightenment, I'm still not decided on what enlightenment is. So this is one of the things that I'm thinking about. So there's this framework, I think his name was Sebastian Conrad, gave, where he says enlightenment is about trying to find your position in a larger world, because the European powers are now in contact with a lot of, until then, unknown to them societies. I'm thinking about that, I don't know. I have an idea about how things work in the political side, about concepts, etc. So I know that in 1730s as well, Ottomans are diplomatically aware of all these debates, noble privileges, noble liberties, and how that transforms into liberty as freedom as we know it today. I want to incorporate that discussion, but enlightenment as an intellectual project, I still don't know much, let's say. So this is one of the questions in my mind, and I will think about it. Thank you very much.
You're not, of course, the only one that has problems with enlightenment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Really thank you.
Really thank you.
It was very, very, very enlightening.
Revolutionary.